Week 5 is the NFL is here, and we are here to talk DFS for the whole Sunday slate. I promise to focus on football and not watch Draymond Green's punch for the night. Happy Friday morning, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday morning DFS version. I am Scott Jenstad, joined as always on Fridays by Ryan Belongia. If you could please rate or review the podcast, we greatly appreciate that. Helps people find us, helps the podcast out a lot. So if you enjoy listening to us all year, hopefully we pick you some winners. We appreciate if you could rate or review us. Ryan, how are you? We're at week 5. This season's flying by pretty good so far.
Yeah, it's flying by. I'm doing well. I went to the Saints-Vikings game in London last week. That was a cool experience.
Nice. How was the double doink in person?
Yeah, it was actually, an entertaining game to watch, and you weren't sure if you were going to get that when Jameis got ruled out and Kamara got ruled out. But yeah, it was cool to see a game in London, and we had really good seats. DFS went pretty well too. I guess it was frustrating, nice. But I made a small profit thanks to TJ Hawkinson, who I had a lot of Hawkinson. I had a lot of Rashad Penny. But
I read somewhere that Hawkinson was like a top 5 DFS tight end score ever. Like, it was an unbelievable game.
Yeah, crazy, right? Yeah, I can't remember, especially a guy that cheap scoring that many points at tight end. Yeah, so yeah, he kind of carried me. I didn't get the other stuff right. I had a lot of Eagles, and the weather kind of slowed that game down. But I don't know. Can't complain. On to the next week. What about you?
Yeah, props to you on Rashad Penny, man. From doing the podcast, you mentioned him, and I shifted off a couple guys to Penny on my main lineup. So I had Penny and Hawkinson in my main lineup. I wish I had done a little more with it. I went with I had so much money after that. I went with Allen and Diggs, and that just didn't. I mean, Allen was okay, but like if you're gonna pay that much for him, you can't be okay. And then Diggs is pretty quiet. So I cashed in tournaments and double ups, but kind of a min cash situation. But with Hawkinson and Penny, it was hard to not be a little disappointed about not hitting a little bit bigger. But it's good to it's always good to be to make a profit. So I'm never complain.
Yeah, and
about that.
we I think we got a little bit unlucky because Josh Jacobs just went off in the second game and kind of nullified Penny and sort of any other cheap stuff you have. I forget, he scored like 37 or something, and he was relatively popular. So that was unfortunate too. But anyways, we'll try to do better this week.
It's an underrated thing. You not only need your guys to do well, you need other guys to not do well. When I've had my couple of really good weeks, you really notice like how few other guys do really, really well.
Right.
You hit the right guys, and you're like, nobody else really went off this week. It's funny how that works. But Geno Smith to the moon, man. It was
Geno Smith.
We talked about a bunch about him last week, and we both liked him. Kind of that sneaky. He's not sneaky anymore, but that was beautiful.
That was, I get for the third, and especially after last night now, for the third straight week, I get to mention that Geno Smith is better than Russell Wilson.
Dude,
and
Russ was horrible last night, and also played really stupidly too. Like, you just
that interception. I mean,
made no. It's just it's a bonkers bad interception.
Right, that's like inexcusable. You just can't do that no matter what, which is so weird from Russ.
You throw that 30 rows deep, you kick a field goal, and you go up 6, and the game's over. Like, Matt Ryan was not driving the field on you at any point. It's just that's an inexcusable pick. Yeah, even Jimmy G is jealous of that decision making. Let's go and overall look at this slate. We got another London game, so we're down to 12 games on our slate. We got 9 early and 3 late again. Primetime games, we had Indy and Denver with one of the worst NFL games of all time last night. We got the Giants and your Packers in London. You're not going this week, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to, but it's not looking good. Tickets are hard to get for this one, but we're one short right now.
Packers and a New York team. Yeah, I gotcha. We got Cincy and Baltimore Sunday night, a pretty good game there, and then the Raiders and Chiefs on Monday night. It's funny. There's no tight ends on this slate. We've got Andrews and Kelsey off the slate. We got Waller off the slate. George Kittle's 5,200 on the slate, the most expensive tight end at 5,200. He's the only guy over 5,000 too. It's pretty wild. Weird week of over-unders too. We've got one game. We have no games that are over 50. We have one that's over 48. We have Philly and Arizona at 49. A really, really fun fantasy game. At least I don't know how fun of a Raider game is, but a fun fantasy game. We have 3 games that are under 45 or under 44. I think we have Tennessee and Washington's 43. Dallas and the Rams, which sounds great on paper, but 42.5. And then Niners Panthers is 39. I think that's a gigantic function of the Panthers offense versus the 49ers defense, which might be the biggest mismatch of the season when you look at it like stats on paper. It's not great for Carolina there. So we have 8 games that leaves us that are between 44 and 48. So it's one of those weeks where you can play a lot of Philly and Arizona, but you have to find a game or two in that middle range that you like. And it's amazing how many games just really slammed to that exact same over under range.
Yeah, even I think this might be the first week with no totals over 50. I don't know. I
think it is too. We've always had like one that kind of sneaks over, but it's a low scoring week. But a couple of those games are going to go off. And we had last week. We had Detroit, Seattle went crazy. So and we talked about that game a lot. But some games are going to get back and forth. Are there any games in that 44 to 48 kind of clumped up range? You're like, this is the one that I want to spend a little more time trying to attack. I think it's going to go over.
Yeah. So I think you're right that the Eagles Cardinals will probably be the most popular stack, I think, and we'll talk about why. But as far as the other ones, I think just the 2 teams with the highest implied totals, the Bills and Tampa. Now their opponents aren't great, but still you can. Even Atlanta and Pittsburgh have some guys you can run it back with. And like the Tampa side, for instance, Brady's cheap, Godwin's cheap, and even Evans is relatively affordable. And the Falcons have just been like the perfect team to target, especially for passing. So I think the Tampa Bay looks okay. And then even the Bills, I know they're huge favorites, but there isn't much on this slate. And there's a couple Pittsburgh guys you could maybe run it back with if you wanted to. What kind of makes me I was kind of off Buffalo. I was just going to forget about it because those games usually aren't great for stacking when you got a 14-point favorite. But then I saw Dawson Knox just got ruled out, and also Crowder just got ruled out.
Yep.
So
Crowder went on IR too.
Yeah. So maybe the target share becomes a little more concentrated for Diggs and Gabe Davis, and you can just do a little mini stack with that game. I haven't quite decided where I'm going to go, but that's what I'm looking at. What about you?
Yeah, I kind of thought the same with the Bills too. That passing tree narrowing I think is a good thing for us in fantasy. I really like Chargers Browns. I think that we got a lot of weapons on both sides, and we got 2 defenses that are not playing especially well right now. And the Browns stack up well in defense, name wise, but without Myles Garrett, without Jadeveon Clowney, they're just a different defense. They had to blitz a lot last week, and it worked a little bit. But if you blitz Justin Herbert, you don't get there, you're gonna pay that price. So it'll be an interesting to see if they even with Herbert back there, if they still blitz. So I think that's a game that over under right now is 47. It was 47.5 last night. It's actually dropped a little bit. But I think that's one that I think could get a little more back and forth than these other games. So it's that's kind of my favorite in this middle, kind of clumped up middle range.
Yeah, it's kind of a slate where you shouldn't even really worry about the totals too much. They're all about the same. Just find a spot you like. Any of these games can end up being the one that goes off. You're not really making a mistake targeting one game over another.
Someone in the chat asked about Khalil Shakir on the Bills, and we will definitely get there. I think that depends a lot on if Isaiah McKenzie is out or not, and it's that's one of the you need some injuries, but he's someone that looks really interesting. He's a 5th round pick out of Boise State, but I do like that one if he turns out to get some other injuries that come into play. Oh, it looks like Ryan may have frozen up a little bit here. I don't know what happened there. So I'm going to chat a little bit. So hopefully Ryan gets back in here in a second. I'm going to take him out and then add him. So we'll get Ryan back here in a second, but I'm going to jump into who we think maybe are going to be the chalk or boring plays this week. Who's everybody going to have? And it's a week that that without that those couple top games where you have an over under that's really really high, that maybe we get. Ryan is back. Are you back?
I think I'm back.
Beautiful.
Sorry.
No worries at all. I had just jumped into talking about boring plays and chalk plays. Who we think is going to be valuable or most rostered this week? And I think a quarterback, it's interesting because I think it's going to be either you pay up for Hurts or Allen, or you're going to pay down. And there's a number of names that you go down. I think the mid-range will be under rostered, but Hurts and Allen at the top, and I think you get like probably a Trevor Lawrence or Tom Brady if you pay down. Who do you think is going to be the most popular quarterback this week?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you pay all the way up. So I think, at least for cash games, people would choose Allen over Hurts just because he projects slightly better. For tournaments, pick whoever you want. Those are the top two options. But yeah, if it's not him, I think it would be Brady. I'm not sure. I like some of those cheaper guys that we'll talk about, but at least for cash games, I'm not sure you need to go below Brady. And Brady's floor and ceiling is definitely higher than those guys in the 5K range. So I think, yeah, people either go Brady or Josh Allen for cash games.
Yeah, I think Hurts will be right there with Allen too. I just think everybody's going to want a piece of this game. Plus, also, the Arizona defense is 24th in yards per attempt. They're just not very good, and I do think that Lawrence will be the one guy in the fives that'll be pretty rostered. I think he'll be there, not as much as Brady, but I think he'll be up there. Cheap in a great matchup, coming off that ridiculous rain game in Philadelphia where fumbled 4 times, but Houston allowed 340 yards and 8.7 yards per attempt to Herbert last week. So I think you just get Houston. So I think people will go there. I think Brady will be more popular. You saw with the weapons back last week. It was back to normal. Brady had 3 touchdowns the first 2 weeks total, and threw 3 last week. You get Evans and Godwin back, it makes just such a huge difference.
Yep, I agree. And then I agree about Lawrence and one other guy. Teddy Bridgewater for 5,400 projects pretty well against the Jets.
Yeah, I'm not a Bridgewater guy, but he just has weapons, right? Like he's
got weapons now.
Yeah, a 10-yard pass turns to a 60-yard pass with those two guys just so easily.
Right, and then that combined with the matchup against the Jets, I think that's why you see the good projection.
Are there any running backs you see as like the obvious, everybody's going to have this guy? Last week we had Jamal Williams, we had Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert's back this week under 6,000. Jamal Williams a little more expensive this week. Breece Hall is 5,400. I've heard some chatter about him being popular. He's playing more and more each week. Is there any running back that sticks out to you like, oh, that's you're just going to start with him in your lineup? Kind of like how we did last week. There was a lot of guys you could go down cheap and pretty easy. Do you ever see anybody being really popular this week?
It doesn't seem to be as clear cut as it was last week, but there's a few guys like Leonard Fournette is going to be relatively popular, like all those Buccaneers. And then Kamara would also, because he's 6,600 in a matchup against Seattle. And then all those guys in the mid 5K range. You mentioned some of them, Breece Hall, but also Jeff Wilson, 5,500, and then both Patriots backs because it's such a good matchup against Detroit. Detroit's been crushed by opposing running backs, and it's tough to pick between Harris and Stevenson, but there's a really good chance that one of them has a big game. So that mid 5K range, there's a lot of good options there. And Herbert for 5,900. So I don't think it's quite as clear cut, but all those are pretty good options.
Yeah, and we'll obviously talk about all those options, but I think there's enough in there where I don't think anybody's going to be glaringly over rostered by any means. I kind of feel the same at receiver. I don't really think there's everybody's going to have this guy this week kind of thing. I think that of the expensive guys, I think Tyreek Hill will probably be the most popular at 8,000, but you could spread that out to a lot of different guys too. I think Christian Kirk at 6,600 in that matchup. A lot of people are going to play Lawrence, so I think that Kirk becomes an easy stack with him, and then a lot of people that won't play Lawrence will just play Kirk at the price. But again, with receivers, I don't really think there's anybody that sticks out to me like, oh, that's one of your 3, and kind of move on and just figure out the rest of your roster.
Yeah,
which is fun. Which is fun, by the way. I kind of like that.
I do too. Yeah. There's not one obvious guy, and it's sort of up to you to pick between which spot you like best. There's some guys in the upper 5K range that are good value. Chris Godwin, 5,900. He saw 10 targets last week in this matchup.
Yeah, you're right. He's probably going to be pretty popular. He's probably the guy that'd be the most popular.
Yeah, he's probably the guy. And then 2 guys under that in the same game. Tyler Lockett, he continues to just be too cheap. So he looks pretty good. And then Olave for 5,700. Assuming Michael Thomas is out again, which I think he's going to be, Olave would look pretty good as well. And then
do you need Jameis to play him or no?
No, I would prefer Jameis to play, but No, I think the price is good enough where
Yeah,
you
and
could still roster him.
Olave was good last week without Jameis. I prefer Jameis, but I think he's so cheap that you can he's so involved in their offense right now. I think you play him. I think Kamara back probably hurts him a little bit, but I still think he's clearly the guy catching passes.
Me too. And then I see one other guy that could end up chalky. So Cordarrelle Patterson's on IR now. Pitts hasn't practiced this week and appears like truly questionable, actually. So
didn't practice this morning either. So I think I think he may even be leaned more towards the doubtful side.
So now you'd be without Patterson and without Pitts. So Drake London looks pretty good for 5,900 in that case, in a scenario where they're probably going to have to be passing for most of the game.
Yeah, I agree there. That's one that as the passing tree narrows, you get someone that's going to have to just get forced targets at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just saw a note that no Kyle Pitts at practice today. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I figured it was
no, that's good.
Worth mentioning and noting as we kind of get these Friday morning injury reports start to come in a little bit. So let's get into the slate. We kind of talked about some popular guys, but let's jump fully into the slate. But first, a note from our sponsors at Swagger. There are 50 million fantasy sports players and sports bettors in the U.S., but 90% of all cash prizes are won by 2% of the players. That's because most sports gaming options were created for pros. The dudes dropping loads of cash on data to find an edge on the rest of us, not Swagger. Swagger is a daily fantasy sports site created for sports fans who simply want some skin in the game and a real shot at winning. Tired of losing because of one bad pick? With Swagger, you don't need to be perfect to win. You simply create a ticket of 4 to 10 simple player props and score points for the ones you get right. Your score determines your win, not the perfect ticket. You can be half right and be all right with Swagger. Swagger offers the most player pops and biggest payouts of any DFS site, as much as 50 times your money. Plus, you can play fantasy football along with major U.S. pro sports, as well as international soccer, Formula One, NASCAR, fight sports, rugby, cricket, and even esports. Ready to play? Visit playwithswagger.com/RotoWire to sign up, and Swagger will give you $10 free to try them out, plus match your first deposit $100 up to $100. Swagger, daily fantasy for all fankind. So Ryan, we talk about quarterbacks first. I think that Jalen Hurts is the one that we look at stacks is the one I go to. It's boring, but man, the dude is just so good. He's got you got plenty of options to play with him. You could play Devontae Smith, who's very up and down. He's had 2 great games, 2 awful games, like 2 complete 0 games. But I mean, I play him with AJ Brown, who I still think is a price where he's pretty affordable. There's lots of options. You can run back with Arizona. You could go back with Zach Ertz. You go back with Hollywood Brown. You can even go back with someone who I think is sneaky this week in Rondale Moore, who played a lot of snaps last week and is cheap. Didn't do much, but is explosive and the kind of guy that you want a cheap piece of in a game where you think it's going to go a little bit back and forth. He's someone that can break a big play, which, you're playing in a tournament. That's kind of the kind of guy you want. So, Hurts and Brown is my favorite stack of the week. It's kind of boring. It's the highest total game. I'm not going to say that I'm, breaking to big news here, but I think Hurts coming out of the rain, playing at Arizona indoors against a bad defense. I love this spot for the Eagles this week.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, couldn't have said it better, really. I could add just a few things.
Yeah.
Maybe for the people that like the numbers as to why the Eagles have been good this season and why they will continue to be one of the best teams to target. They currently rank 1st in pass blocking, 2nd in pace, 4th in average play clock remaining, and 6th in no huddle rate. So their games just constantly produce more combined snaps than most all the other games. I believe they're 3rd right now. Then this specific matchup with Arizona's got one of the worst secondaries in the league, and we've seen them. Yeah, we've seen them shredded multiple times already this season. So it's a really good spot. Yeah, I'm with you. And the Eagles coming out of that bad weather and into the dome.
Yeah.
I'm going to go right back to them and right back to AJ Brown as well. He ranks 1st in the league in air yards share. So Jalen Hurts is looking for him deep, and they're going to start connecting.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, Brown's been good, but you kind of feel that huge breakout game is coming. He's only scored once, but he still has a lot of yards, a lot of targets. I feel like that huge, 2 touchdown, 140-yard game is just on the brink, and I don't want to miss it.
Yep, I agree. And then the tight ends in that game we can touch on. You brought up this point at the beginning of the podcast in that there's tight end is especially weak this week. There's no elite options. And so this opens up the position a lot more. Sometimes you're afraid to take shots on some of these guys because you just don't feel like their ceiling is as high as some of the elite guys. But yeah, this week's the position is weak, so you can play a lot more of these tight ends, and that includes Goddard and Ertz, who are actually two of the better ones.
Yeah, Goddard just always, hasn't been huge either, but always gets it done. He has the ability to make big plays when you don't get a tight end very much. Like when he does get the ball, he gets 6 targets last week. He was 5 for 80 or 5 for 70 or something like that. But when he gets targets, he does something with them. Like he gets him in stride. He can get yards after the catch. He just feels like a guy that is not, doesn't need the 1 yard touchdown as a tight end to work. A lot of these guys are talking about like, well, if they get the red zone play, we're good. But if not, you're looking at 3 for 12 or something like that. Goddard's someone who has some athleticism that can explode, and with Hurts and with everybody having to guard Brown and Devontae Smith, it presents him so many one-on-one opportunities. It's such a great setup for him.
Yeah, great points. Great points. We've seen Goddard with multiple 50-yard plus catches, so it's not like other tight ends.
So if you want to not go the Eagles Cardinal stack this week, what are you doing at quarterback? You mentioned Josh Allen before, and I think that we kind of hit on him enough. But it sounds like you're Tom Brady this week. So talk to me about that one.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily want to be like I'm not a guy that
nobody ever wants to be Tom Brady. It's
no, but he's tough for DFS sometimes, especially when he's expensive. But 6K is really cheap, and then we just mentioned Godwin is also really cheap. So you just feel like Brady could throw for 300 and a few touchdowns, and like a scenario like that happens pretty often, and it's an easy game to stack because we mentioned Atlanta. You just play Drake London, especially if Pitts is going to be out. So there's just not that many decisions to make. Like you could play Brady, Evans, Godwin, and London. You play all of them if you want, or you could just play one Tampa receiver and maybe take a chance on this Cade Otton, who's min-price tight end, who's going to start for Cameron Brate. Now, I don't know if I'd do that, but Brate being out and them not really having any tight ends just means more for Evans and Godwin. So yeah, I do like that Tampa stack.
Yeah, it's funny as you when you first open up the slate and all the salaries and stuff, you scroll down, you're like, oh my God, Brady's 6,000. Like everybody's gonna have him. It's just one of those things that it stuck out. And I get it. He had had some bad games, but last week you could tell it was totally different with all the weapons back. Like he was throwing to Cole Beasley, who retired now. That's what we're talking about. That's who he was throwing the ball to a couple weeks ago. So Evans off suspension, Godwin off the injury. It just lines up really, really well. The one that I kind of like that I think is going to get very, very lost this week is the Chargers. I think Justin Herbert. We talked about how I think everybody's going to go to Brady or Lawrence or Allen or Hurts. I liked Herbert in the middle there, kind of getting overlooked at 7,100. He looked healthy last week. Finally, he got hurt in week 2. And then week 3 didn't look like himself. Last week he looked good against the Texans. Granted, they aren't good, but 340, 8.7 yards per attempt. The Browns blitzed him a lot last year. We talked about at the top, like he does well against, but he had 398 and 4 against the Browns last year. So there's some history here. The Browns have been pretty good on pass D, but they faced Baker Mayfield, Joe Flacco, Mitch Trubisky, and Marcus Mariota. If I was going to name the 5 worst quarterbacks in the NFL right now, like those are probably 4 of the 5 right there, along with Matt Ryan. So they've faced nobody on offense. Herbert is obviously an elite option. I think it's easy to stack him too. You just stack him with Mike Williams, who bounced back nicely this week, over 100 yards. And I really like running them back with Nick Chubb. I think that works really well. You could run it back with Amari Cooper if you want to also, but I prefer Chubb. If you get the running back in there, and I think that the Browns want to run. The Chargers can't stop the run. That's been a 2-year theme now. I just think this all lines up really well. The only thing that makes it a little confusing is how to figure out Austin Eckler in there, who had 3 touchdowns last week, and is the kind of guy that can catch passes from Herbert and score. But I like Herbert Williams running back with Chubb as a way to get different from everybody else. I think it'll be very under-owned this week with Brady so cheap and with Hurts and Allen so popular.
Yep, I like that too. I think you sold me. Actually, I've been looking for another stack that's not going to be quite as popular, and I really don't like any of them. But I can get behind that Herbert stack, especially if Keenan's out. I think I'd probably just leave Eckler off.
I would too.
But like you mentioned, he
It looks like Ryan's internet is not great this morning, so sorry about that, folks. I will get him back in here again here at some point too. It's funny, we talked about the stacks week. There just really aren't a lot. I think the 5 quarterbacks we mentioned are definitely going to be the ones that people look at. I do think Herbert will be not very popular, but those other 4, I think that Trevor Lawrence coming out of the rain is an interesting spot just because last week was a mess. Yeah, I was just talking about Trevor Lawrence real quick. Lawrence had the 4 fumbles last week. He was 11 for 23. He clearly was not comfortable in the rain. It was very evident. And he had one fumble. He literally just was rolling out of the pocket, just dropped the ball. He's literally not a mutter in any way. Houston got lit up by Herbert last week. I think the matchup's great. They are 7-point favorites, so maybe they run the ball, but they're a team that I think is going to still pass through the 3 quarters. And I think Lawrence is easy to stack with Christian Kirk. If Zay Jones plays, you could go there if you want to go cheap. And you can come back with Houston. You can come back with Dameon Pierce. You can come back with Brandon Cooks. I think it lines up pretty well. So I do think it'll be Brady and Lawrence for a lot of people. Hurts and Allen at the top. I like Herbert in the middle. Ryan, is there any other quarterback stacks you really like? Because as I went through this slate, I wasn't finding a lot of, I can play this guy too, or I can play this guy too. It felt pretty narrow to me in options that I liked.
Yeah, no, not really. It feels pretty like I would just be forcing it. I kind of like Lawrence for all the reasons that you mentioned. We were on Geno Smith last week. I like Geno Smith in that Seattle passing attack going forward, but at New Orleans isn't the greatest spot.
Agreed. What do you do with this crazy Detroit team that scores a lot of points, gives up a lot of points? I don't really love Goff at New England, but last week without Chark, DeAndre Swift, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, all he did was go 378 and 4 touchdowns. Granted, that game was back and forth and got wild, but dude has 4 touchdowns in 2 of his last 3 games. I just don't know if New England could get involved in a shootout. The defense is better, and they're going to want to run the ball like you mentioned. I don't see this being a shootout for some reason.
No, I don't either. I think maybe you could consider it if Amon-Ra and Chark are out again. It looks like St. Brown's going to be out. Chark has been practicing. I don't know, though. You're right. I think New England is just going to try to slow this down and run it as much as they can, though.
They're going with Bailey Zappi at quarterback. I think the last thing Bill wants to do is get in a shootout with Bailey Zappi.
Yeah, I'm with you. So Detroit seems tougher this week.
Yeah. So let's jump into running backs. So first, a note for our sponsors at No House Advantage. No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. Play in pick'em contests versus other people for a shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20 times your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet on up to 5 player prop over-unders or individual player matchups across every sports league, including the NFL, the NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code NHAWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at nohouseadvantage.com or download the app on app stores to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined, because it's not just how you play, but also where you play. You don't want to miss out on this. So Ryan, I was looking at this site. It's actually pretty cool. I downloaded my No House Advantage on my phone. So I wanted your thought on a couple player props real quick before we move on, just because I was looking at this site. It's a fun little thing to kind of, it builds right into DFS, playing over-unders. You looked at some of these props too. Give me a couple that you liked on the No House Advantage site that you'll be playing this week.
Well, I love the Drake London prop, first of all. We were just talking about that game, and now
he's over under 60 and a half receiving yards.
60 and a half. So Drake London over 60 and a half. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but that would feel like close to a lock if you get Pitts out. And then a couple of those Steelers, a couple of those Steelers unders that I like. Because we've got Kenny Pickett starting against the Bills. So I don't mind his under. I believe it was 200 and some. I don't remember exactly.
211.5.
211, I kind of like that under. And then Deontay Johnson's receiving yard prop. I mean, he's injured a little bit. He was limited at practice. He only had 2 catches for 11 yards last week. And I think his number was 55 or 54. So I like the under in that one too.
So you're an under guy. I'm definitely an over guy. I never bet unders. I'm just I'm so bad at picking them, but I usually go overs. There are a couple on the site on the No House Advantage site that I do like this week. I really like DK Metcalf. His over unders at 65 and a half. That feels really low to me. Geno Smith's playing well right now. I don't think we get a shootout against New Orleans, but DK's been really good the last couple weeks. He got 149 yards last week, 64 the week before. I think he goes easily over that number. I think they try and hit one or two big plays with him. I think they've realized that giving him a couple shots each week is a really, really good idea. So him and Lockett, it's weird. We used to have like the either or with Metcalf and Lockett. Now I feel like it's so narrowed between them. It's just one of the two. Like if Russ used to throw the ball at tight end or third receivers, I think it's Metcalf and Lockett for Geno, and I like both guys, but I think Metcalf's number at 65.5 is just too low. And for my other one, I'm gonna go. We're gonna call this a segue in the business. I'm about to talk about him, but Dalvin Cook I like a lot this week. He's one of my favorite plays in DFS. I think over under 84.5 rushing yards against the Bears works really well. I feel like Cook has been a little bit quiet so far through 4 weeks. Hasn't topped 100 yards yet. But you look at 84.5. I mean, he was at 90 against the Packers. He had 96 against Detroit. He had 76 last week against New Orleans in a game where he wasn't great. But that's 3 out of 4 weeks where he's been right at that number. 2 of the weeks he's been over. I think we kind of tossed the Philadelphia game out. That game got weird. But I'll go Dalvin Cook over 84.5 rushing yards is my other prop. So definitely check it out in the No House Advantage app. It's a really fun little setup. I was playing with the site last night, so I figured I wanted to ask you a few of those over-unders. But let's get into running backs, expensive running backs. We've got Christian McCaffrey's 8,500 in a really tough matchup against the 49ers defense that's playing really well right now. Derrick Henry's 8,200, Nick Chubb 8,000, Eckler 78, Dalvin Cook 73. No surprise from what I just said, but I really like Dalvin Cook in this range. I think he's lower price than all these other guys. I think he belongs in the same group. Good game script. They're favored against the Bears. Chicago's allowed 4.8 yards per carry. I think this is the week that Cook finally breaks out. We see over 100 yards and a touchdown or two.
Yep, I'm with you. And this is the cheapest we've seen him. And you mentioned a little bit with the Philadelphia game, but even then Detroit and even the New Orleans game, none of the scripts really worked out in Dalvin's favor. And this home matchup against the Bears, you can see it. You can see it working out much better for the running game. I think at 7,300, Cook has a big ceiling for that salary. So he'd be my pick in that range too.
As the season goes on, I become more disgusted the 49ers lost to the Bears and the Broncos. Because they both are absolutely terrible. The Broncos were so bad last night, and the Bears are bad. It's like that if all the games to get the monsoon in week 1, like the Niners, there's no way the Niners lose to the Bears without the it's so frustrating. But
it's unlucky. I agree.
Beat the Rams, so got back on track a little bit. The defense is balling out. I mean, if you want to be different, like McCaffrey's amazing. He had 9 for 81 and a touchdown receiving last week. They finally used him in the receiving game, and you got to think they're trailing in this game. Although the Niners are weird, like they don't blow teams out that often because they just are so conservative on offense. But man, it's hard to pay 8,500 for somebody against the best defense in the league right now.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I just can't do it. The Niners defense is just too good, and you touched on it at the start. There's a huge mismatch just on both sides of the trenches in that game. The Niners D-line is amazing. The Panthers offensive line is not. I mean, it sets up terribly for McCaffrey, and that's the lowest total game. I'm not really trying to go there.
At some point, I'm going to need Micah Parsons to just kind of, not be great for a couple of weeks because I do have Nick Bosa bet as a defensive player of the year, and he's got 6 sacks already. He's moved way down, and he's like the second favorite. But Parsons is a big favorite right now. The dude Micah Parsons is awesome, but if he just like chill on the sacks for like 2 or 3 weeks and get me some stats there, I do like Bosa's chances there just because I think that they could end up being the best defense. If you're the best player in the best defense, that usually works pretty well. It's just that Parsons is such a freak that maybe he blows that up, but. What do you do with everybody else in this range? Derrick Henry had a big week last week. Good to see he had 5 targets. Washington's pretty good against the run, but Henry's a guy that could beat anybody. He's 22 for 114 last week. I always like Nick Chubb. He's probably my second favorite this range at 8,000. He has over 100 rush yards in 3 or 4 games. Just hard on DraftKings. He doesn't get the receiving. You don't have that floor in receiving. You just no involvement in the passing game at all. But man, Dameon Pierce smoked the Chargers last week. He had a 75-yard run. James Robinson the week before. We're talking about guys who aren't uber studs like Chubb. He's 9 for 118, then a touchdown last week. He's just such a monster. I think that you got to love his chance to get over 100 yards. It doesn't matter if he scores once or twice. If he scores once or twice, it becomes a really good play. But 8,000, he's got to get in the end zone without the receiving yards.
Yeah, I'm with you. Henry and Chubb, they're both like similar plays in that They need touchdowns to be optimal and rushing yards, but in that neither of them are going to be popular either. Like the guys below them will be much more popular, and people aren't paying up for running back as much these days. They prefer to pay up at receiver. So yeah, good arguments for Henry and Chubb. I think I lean Chubb as well, especially if you're going to focus on that game, especially because that's the way to beat the Chargers is on the ground, and they've allowed it many times already, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and you got to think they're going to want to keep the ball away from Justin Herbert as much as they can, and that's running the ball, running the clock is the way to do that. So you make a good point on these guys being not very popular. I just think there's so many cheap running backs. We hit on a few at the beginning. We'll hit them all now, but I think you're right. I think the people are going to be paying down. I think people will play Cook. I think that 7,300 kind of sticks out a little bit. He's so much cheaper than the other guys, but let's get into that mid range. It's a giant one this week. There's a lot of options. You mentioned Fournette at 6,900. You mentioned Kamara at 6,600. We got Jamal Williams off the big game at 65. We got Miles Sanders off 134 and 2 touchdowns, 6,500. James Robinson's here in a really good matchup at 6,300. Dameon Pierce, 62. Devin Singletary in a game where they're favored by 14 at 61. This is a stacked range. Who are you picking in this range? Because I found myself going up to Cook and then kind of down in the 5,000s. None of these guys really stuck out to me. They're all you can kind of argue for all of them, but I kind of like dropping down in the 5,000s a little more than I did in this range.
Yeah, I mean, just yet again, I'm gonna echo what you just said. It's Cook for me, or else I'm gonna go down. There's so many guys in the mid 5K range that I'd be happy to roster. As far as this 6K range, like, I'm not going to chase Jamal Williams again at New England. I don't really love Detroit in that spot. Like Fournette's fine, but I'm going to be on the passing game instead. Of course, I should mention that, though, this could be a Fournette spot instead of a passing game spot. If Atlanta, with all these injuries, puts up no resistance, there's going to be no reason for Brady to keep chucking it around. So I get the argument for Fournette. The interesting one, if I'm going to do anything, like, I could maybe be talked into Kamara. I mean, it's worrying with that injury, but he's another one that we never see priced this cheap. I'm just like worried that like how much would he play? I don't know.
That was my concern. Him was like if they get up, which you love for a running back, I just don't think they lean on him really. I just don't think they want to overuse him right now. And I know he says he's fine. He says he's back, but the one that's interesting to me is Miles Sanders, 6,500. It's weird that he's more expensive than we're used to now, but if you want to get some leverage in this game, like I think a lot of people are playing the passing game for Philly, and I don't think anybody's going to really play the run game. I just think that 6,500, he's expensive enough for people like, if I wanted this game, I'll just play Hurts in the passing game, but he was 27 for 134 and 2 touchdowns last week, 22 receiving yards on 2 catches. Arizona's very middling against running back. They're not horrible, but they're not good. I think it's a game where game script kind of decides where this goes. If Arizona can score a little bit, Kyler can get going. I love the passing game, but Kyler looks really bad early in games. There's games where Arizona, I mean, he and Kingsbury were yelling at each other on the field last week. Like, it's just kind of a mess there. And, if they start slow, Philly could, score 17 points early, and then maybe they just hand the ball off the whole second half too. So I think it's an interesting way. You want to get some leverage and different in this game in a tournament. I think you go Sanders instead of the passing game. I think you can get that. You can get pretty interesting. You can even go Sanders, with the Arizona passing game if you wanted to be really different and think that, maybe they get up and Kyler throws the ball a lot. I tried to be tricky with Kyler last week with the super low percentage. It didn't really work well. And, after watching that whole game, Arizona-Carolina was an awful game, and I had Kyler, so I was watching it, and I kind of don't want to do it again because I don't want to watch Kyler again and root for him.
Yeah, well, I have that exact stack written up as sort of my contrarian stack this week. Nice. Kyler Murray, Miles Sanders stack. So yeah, I'm happy to hear you say that. I'm not sure I'm going to get there. Again, we both love the Hurts side and the Eagles side, but yeah, I do think that's interesting because Miles Sanders is a good play, and you mentioned the Arizona guys, Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, and Ertz. So if you're going to play Kyler, using Miles Sanders is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I actually really like that. I like it a way to get different. And if it's a multi-entry kind of strategy, but if you're playing a bunch of lines, I think it's a really good, like you mentioned, contrarian one there. So we mentioned all the running backs in the 5s. What are we going to do here? We got Khalil Herbert at 5,900. We have Jeff Wilson at 5,500. Ramondre Stevenson, 5,500. Breece Hall, we mentioned earlier, 5,400. We've even got Rashad Penny down here again at 5,300 off the big game. We have Raheem Mostert at 5,000. We have the Atlanta guys. I don't really think I'm going to play them, but Tyler Algiers, 4,700. This range has a lot of options. I get the feeling that picking the right one in this range is who's going to win this week. Like everybody's going to have pieces of this range in all their lineups. You're going to see a lot of guys in the 5,000s. Some will bust, some will boom. So, Ryan, who am I taking? Who am I winning with here?
Oh man, unfortunately, I don't think there's much I can tell you. All these 5K guys are like pretty good options, and
they are.
None of them really stand out, I guess. Jeff Wilson seems okay based on the matchup. That game script could work favorably for San Fran if Carolina's just not able to do anything. I mean, maybe Wilson could rush for over 100 and get in the end zone. I really like these New England guys. It's just tough to pick one. I think like if you knew which New England guy it was going to be, that's who I would choose. I just think it's such a good matchup.
How many times have you said that over the years?
Yeah, not many. Well, I mean, sometimes, but usually we just like forget about New England because they have these two guys, and they're not a very good team. So we're not even ever considering them. I actually think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple lineups and just make the same lineup and have one with Harris and one with Stevenson, because I do think one of these guys has 25, 30 points in them in the right scenario. I mean, we see backs get banged up all the time. I mean, if one of these New England guys turned into the bell cow, could be a huge second half. Yeah, and I could be talked into Breece Hall too. I don't know, Scott. Who do you like in this range?
It's hard because you can make cases for all these guys. They're all in pretty good spots. We usually don't get guys that are down here this cheap and also in good situations. You got Stevenson and Harris are against Detroit. Breece Hall is kind of taking over that job. I really like Jeff Wilson this week at 5,500. You look at snap share. He's the guy. Like, I know we talked about like if Mitchell get hurt, you go committee, but Wilson's been 88 and 90% of the running back touches the last 2 weeks. Like, that is a gigantic snap share, a gigantic touch share, I guess I should say. I don't think Kyle really, because I talk about Kyle like we're friends. I don't think Shanahan really loves any of his backups. He loves Tevin Coleman, but Tevin Coleman's old. He clearly likes Jordan Mason, but doesn't trust him right now. He's on special teams. Marlon Mack actually had a key fumble recovery on special teams last week, which is a big part of the game, but nothing in the run game. Like, it's Wilson, it's nobody else. And Wilson, last week, that touchdown, like, people really realize Jeff Wilson's fast. Like, he motored through there and scored the touchdown. I think they want to get up in this game. I think they want to feed Wilson the whole second half. 5,500, I think, is way too cheap. Who knows? This is Niners. They tend to screw things up, but I have a hard time seeing Carolina, score much at all. It'd have to be like some fluky stuff and turnovers. Jimmy throws a pick and Jimmy steps out of the back of the end zone. The things that happen in 49ers games. But I just like the game script a lot for Wilson. I also think that I think Khalil Herbert at 5,900 will be under rostered this week because he was just kind of okay last week, but he's still at 100 yards. Like, we're talking about someone that's cheap. Like, give me that. I just think Khalil Herbert's really good. Obviously, this means David Montgomery's not going to play. I don't think he's going to play. I don't think he's been ruled out yet, but it seems pretty clear it'll be one more week for Montgomery. Not a great game script as an underdog, but I think that he can catch passes too. Minnesota's allowed 4.5 yards of carry, so they're not great against the run. I don't want to be like I like all these guys in this range, but give me Wilson and then give me Herbert second. I just have too many nightmares of trying to pick New England running backs in season long over the years. So that one always worries me. But I think you're right. I think one of those guys is going to have a big game. I just have no idea which it's going to be.
Yep, and for anyone wondering about cash, I have Jeff Wilson highlighted as my cash play in that range. I feel comfortable for everything that you just said about him. If you want the safest option in that range for cash games, I think it's Wilson, and he'll be pretty popular too, which is always a reason to roster a guy in cash games.
You were the Rashad Penny whisperer last week. You nailed that play when it wasn't all that talked about. He's 5,300 this week. He was 17 for 151, 2 touchdowns last week on 48 snaps. He's 5,300 at the Saints. Do you go back to him, or do you like these other guys a little bit more this week, just based on matchup and kind of their game script and spot?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think I go back to him. No, these four or five guys ahead of him that just I like better. And part of it last week was Penny, that there really wasn't that many options, and it was a matchup against Detroit. We just spoke about the Patriots have that matchup this time. This is a tougher matchup for Penny, and he doesn't really get involved in the passing game. I think if I was going to take a shot cheaper, maybe Mostert. You mentioned Mostert. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I like that one. If I'm going cheaper, that's where I'm going. He had 46 snaps last week, and Chase Edmonds only played 18. It seems like McDaniel is really shifting here. I don't. Who knows what we're going to get with? I don't like Teddy Bridgewater very much as a quarterback, but I think he should be able to hand it off. He was 15 for 69 last week and 2 for 12. But the key for me with Mostert and anybody down here this cheap is Raheem Mostert can hit 80-yarder at any point. He might be the fastest running back in the NFL, and you may think I'm exaggerating, but like next gen stats, like actually have him. And he had like 3 of the 5 fastest runs the last couple of years. Like when he gets out there, he is literally gone. And if I want someone at 5,000, they break one tackle and they're gone. Like that's the kind of guy I want. I don't want to have to rely on someone to get 25 touches down here because it's just not going to happen. So that's why Penny was so great last week. I mean, he broke that long play. He's explosive. And I think that Mostert is that explosive guy. And if he gets enough touches, I think if he gets 16, 17 touches, the chances are pretty high that he breaks one, which I do like. And against the Jets, I do like that spot. If I'm getting really cheap this week, it's Mostert definitely for me over anybody in Atlanta. The Atlanta Cordell Patterson's out. You mentioned Algiers 4,700. Caleb Huntley got 10 touches last week. I think that there's enough splitting of carries last week. Then at Tampa Bay, I'm not going to touch this at all.
Yeah, I remember reading that Mostert beat Tyreek Hill in a race at Dolphins camp or something like that. So he's got to be pretty fast.
I'm not surprised. Obviously, he was on the Niners, and I love Raheem Mostert. He just couldn't stay healthy. It was so frustrating because they had that. You remember that as a Packers fan. He had that game in the playoffs where he was unstoppable.
Oh yeah, he was unstoppable. Yeah. He was unstoppable.
One crease and he was just gone. He's so fast. He's so banged up. You may play him and he may play 2 snaps and be done. Like there's always that chance because he's just not. I'm just not sure his body's built for me NFL running back, but he's played 4 weeks so far. The snap count's going up. Mike McDaniel obviously knows his game from being with the 49ers. I think that he's just an explosive guy that at 5,000 can win a tournament right there.
Yep.
Let's jump into receivers as we kind of close out here. A lot of receivers to talk about, but first enough from our sponsors at Monkey Knife Fight. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action you're looking for. And if college football is more your speed, we've got plenty of that also. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win, daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. So we've got expensive running back or expensive receivers aplenty here this week. We've got a lot of options. Cooper Kupp, 9,600. Weird game on Monday night against the Niners. They just pretty much focused on him and only him. He had 19 targets in that game. He has 15, 14, 6, and 19 targets so far this week. Clearly, as Stafford just drops back and throws him, doesn't trust Allen Robinson. Higbee's actually become the second target there. But he's got 9,600. Justin Jefferson off the big game that you saw in person. That must have been fun at 8,900. Stephon Diggs, 8,400. Tyreek Hill, 8,000. We get a little bit lower. We get to Debo at 7,700 and A.J. Brown at 7,500. If you're paying up at receiver this week, where are you looking to go?
Yeah, this is another one of those just take your pick, really. You can make a case for sort of all these guys. It's tough for me. I haven't decided yet because, we talked about it. I like the Eagles and the Bucks, and they have, these mid-range receivers. So It might be tough for me to get up to this top range. But, all these guys are in pretty good spots. Cooper Kupp, Kupp only had 4 catches against Arizona, and he's still on pace to break the receptions record after 4 weeks, after he got 14 last week. I think the Cowboys D line is elite, and the Rams are sort of banged up on the offensive line. So I think we could see a lot of quicker passes to Kupp, and obviously Higbee too. But I think Kupp could have a big game in that spot. Jefferson too. The Bears are without Jalen Johnson, who's by far their best cornerback, one of the better corners in the league, actually. So yeah, it's a spot for Jefferson where he could go off too. Stephon Diggs, everyone was on Diggs the last couple weeks. He sort of got hurt by the bad weather game last week. People aren't going to be on him quite as much here just because of the matchup against the Steelers. People don't really want to target it. But I think you can always go to Diggs. You mentioned Hill at the start. Good option. I like Deebo Samuel for 7,700. Deebo Samuel, now that Jimmy G's back, I think if I have to pick one, I'll say Deebo because he's the cheapest, and because Jimmy G's back, I actually think it's a pretty good matchup for him. I think people will sort of avoid this matchup because it has the low total. Yeah. But I think with Jimmy G back, it gives him more upside in the passing game than with Trey Lance, and he has multiple touchdown upside too. We're going to see Deebo get handoffs in the red zone, yeah. So yeah, I think he has a big ceiling for that price, like a comparable ceiling to these other guys priced above him. Do you have one that you could single out? Because I really can't do it.
So I know it was middle of the night for you in Europe there for the Monday night game, but man, that Debo Samuel touchdown was insane. That was I just ran over Jalen Ramsey. Like I'm not even sure that pass by Jimmy G was where it was supposed to be. Like if it was lower, it might have been a pick, but he snapped it. Just an unbelievable. Debo's just when you see the ball in the hands, the dude is just unbelievable.
That was just like a classic Debo touchdown.
It was. It was. It's like, oh, that's a good, nice gainer. Oh, we got 10 yards, and all of a sudden, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a touchdown. Mine here is two. Mine is AJ Brown at 7,500. We mentioned before, I love this. I love the Eagles' offense this week. I like team to go against Arizona indoors, fast pace. I think it's going to be a fun game. I think AJ Brown is. I mentioned before. I feel that large game is on the horizon. I'm not going to miss it. He had another game last week. 5 for 95 on 7 targets, but only has 1 touchdown in the year. If you look at his targets, 13, 8, 10, and 7. Super involved, and we get someone as talented and as good as AJ Brown. Like whenever he touched the ball in Tennessee, he ended up scoring. I think it's only a matter of time before he has a 2 touchdown game, and I think I'm going to call it for this week. And then Tyreek is my other guy in here at 8,000. I like how much Teddy threw to him once he got now that he's in the game. He was 14 targets last week, 10 for 160. The Jets are allowing 9.3 yards per target. I think that as much as Tyreek wants to get done here against the Jets, he'll be able to. I like that how much he was targeted over Jalen Waddle. I love Jalen Waddle, but for fantasy, for DFS, the fact that Bridgewater threw to Hill a lot more than Waddle, is a pretty good sign if you want to play Tyreek.
Yep, can't argue with that. And I didn't take it all the way down to AJ Brown, but I'm with you on AJ Brown. That's going to be my guy too.
In the low 7s here, we have some interesting names. We have Marquise Brown at 7,200, coming off 3 straight double-digit target games. Nice game script for him. Again, we talked about if you play Philly, you can come back with Brown. Mike Williams is 7,100. I think for me, that's only when I play Justin Herbert, as I'm going to stack them together. But a nice bounce back, 7 for 120 on 11 targets last week. Cleveland's given up a lot of big plays in the passing offense. So, there you could see the explosion plays from Williams. And then CeeDee Lamb, kind of balling out with Cooper Rush right now. He's 8+ targets in every game. Last 2 weeks, 887 a touchdown, 697 a touchdown. The Rams are really struggling with wide receiver ones, believe it or not. I know they have Jalen Ramsey, but they can kind of move him around. But you look at Debo last week with 6 for 115 and a touchdown. The Rams are the worst in the NFL in fantasy points per game to wide receiver ones. We're through 4 weeks. I get it. Doesn't matter. They face Stephon Diggs. They face Debo Samuel. They face some good players. But I think CeeDee Lamb at 7,000 is very playable, and I don't think a lot of people are going to play him this week against the Rams.
No, I agree with you about both things, and I probably won't either just because of some of the other guys in this range. I'm going to play Mike Evans, 6,900. He had a big game last week. He just catches so many touchdowns, and he has so many multiple touchdown games. So, yeah, I'm going to have him in some Tampa stacks. And then I don't think people will roster AJ Brown and Marquise Brown together, stacking that game. There's other ways to stack that game.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try to make Hurts, AJ Brown, and Hollywood Brown with maybe some of the cheaper running backs to make it affordable.
Yeah, it's an expensive start when you look at it. I mean, Hurts is one of the most expensive quarterbacks, and then you got 2 guys over 7,000. It does get a little tough quick. You have to play a cheap tight end, but we mentioned we have a lot of cheap running backs, so I think you can make it work. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people will not be able to afford all 3. As we get to 6,000, we mentioned DK Metcalf earlier. We were talking about no house advantage. I do like DK this week, but 6,800 is hard. Not just go to Lockett. He's so much cheaper there. This 6,000 range, another spot, kind of like the running backs. I like the receivers in the 7s. We mentioned a lot of guys. I like the low 7 range a lot. I like the 5,000 range a lot. There's not a lot of receivers I like in the 6,000s. That I want to play this week. But the one I wanted to mention that I love this week, and it's probably going to be a little off the radar. I love Terry McLaurin this week at 6,200. Super quiet last week, only 6 targets, 2 for 15. But this is a great matchup. Tennessee's allowing 9.5 yards per target. They're 30th in the NFL in touchdown rate to wide receivers. He's very involved still. We know he's talented, but the last 3 weeks, 6, 9, and 8 targets. So still getting a lot of touches. 6,200 is low price for someone as talented as McLaurin. I know he's tied to Carson Wentz. I do get that. But I think this is a week that I think McLaurin will be very under-rostered, not popular, and I do like him to have finally a big breakout week this week.
Yeah, I like that call. That he'd bring some big leverage. I mean, not many people are going to roster McLaurin this week. Nope. He's just kind of in that dead range, and you mentioned he's got Wentz, and It's not really a
I love the matchup this week. I think Tennessee's a secondary to pick on right now, and I always like the receiver off a couple quiet games. I think McLaurin's my kind of off the radar, low rostered play in this range.
Okay, yeah, I'll give one. If you're thinking about playing Josh Allen and the Bills, I'm telling Gabe Davis is going to have a 2-touchdown game in the near future. It seems like he's healthy now, and now that Dawson Knox and Crowder are out, maybe a few more opportunities. He's just not going to be really rostered either in this range. So I think if you're going to play Josh Allen, you should get some Gabe Davis exposure too.
Yeah, we talk about receivers coming off slow weeks. He's 3 for 37 and 1 for 13 last 2 weeks. That just can't last. I mean, he had 80 yards and touchdown the first game against the Rams. Obviously, remember the playoff game last year. He's just so explosive. He's there. He's an over the top big play guy. I do like that. Anytime you compare someone that is due a little bit and priced down with the best quarterback in the NFL, that's the best fantasy quarterback in the NFL. I don't want to go there and piss people off, but Allen's the best fantasy quarterback in the NFL. That's been proven the last couple of years. Anytime you can get yourself someone a little underpriced, I think you tie that well with Allen.
Yep. No argument for me. I like Allen.
What about the 5,000s? There are a lot of names down here, a lot of options. We've already mentioned, I think we both really, really like Drake London. We both like Chris Godwin. Those are both 5,900. They just feel underpriced with the way. I mean, Godwin had 10 targets last week, played 85 dropbacks. Most importantly, coming off the injury, we just want to see him out in the field. London was quiet last week, but the Atlanta pass game was miserable last week. A way better game script in terms of having to throw this week against Tampa Bay. You got to think he gets a lot of targets, especially with Kyle Pitts. Likely going to be out after he missed practice the last 3 days. So aside from Godwin and London, I think we've hit on enough. Who else do you think you find yourself playing in the 5,000s? You just kind of like, or maybe let's go 4,500 and above. Who do you find yourself playing down here? Or is it just London and Godwin?
Yeah, right now in the builds that I've made right now, it's those guys in the mid 5K range because I've been using those mid-priced running backs. It's made it so I haven't had to pay down more at receiver. If I was going to, I would monitor this Detroit situation because if St. Brown and Chark are ruled out again, Josh Reynolds is going to project as one of the better value plays. Even in a matchup against New England, he would be like all Goff has to throw to. So I think that would be interesting. I think if you're stacking the Bills game, I guess this is a little bit cheaper, but Pickens for 4,300 after 6 catches for 102 yards, I think that would be okay. But yeah, otherwise this range is like kind of a dead range for me. Maybe you have somebody. I think the upper 5K range is just too good. And even Devontae Smith at 6K would be another guy who we're going to probably be pairing with Hurts.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. This upper 5K is just so good. The cheaper guys are tough to get to. I mean, you mentioned Lockett at 5,600 too. You mentioned Olave at 5,700. And that's 5 guys between 56 and 6,000 that we think are very, very playable this week. Before we get super cheap, is there any way to talk you into Robert Woods as 5,200 with Treylon Burks out? Great matchup against Washington. They're allowing 9.3 yards per target. And I was like, oh, he scored last week. And I looked, he was like 4 for 30. The Tennessee pass game is so frustrating, but Burks being out does narrow their passing tree a bunch. I like Robert Woods, but I found myself at first I was like, oh, that's cheap. I'm going to play him. And then as I got into the slate, I found myself not playing him.
Yeah, no, it's a good call, though. I was thinking about that when I saw Burks out. I mean, a Robert Woods and Terry McLaurin mini stack. I mean, that would take you straight to the top right there.
Yep. And nobody would have it. So I think that's workable. Mm-hmm. I had a hard time getting there. I think Josh Reynolds was my other guy bolted down here. He's 4,900. Very live if Amon-Ra and DJ Chark miss.
Even if Chark plays, I should say. We just need Amon-Ra out.
Yeah,
really.
That's probably true. He had 18 targets the last 2 weeks. He had 8 targets last week, even with Hawkinson having 108 targets. Reynolds still got there too. What about uber cheap? I think my favorite under 4,500 is Rondale Moore. I think he's a really interesting run back to the Philly stack. If you can't afford a Hollywood Brown, you maybe want to play one expensive running back. He's 4,100. He played 65 snaps for the Cardinals last week. He had 3 for 11. Was very did not help you out there. 4.1 points, but 5 targets. But first game back. I like the fact that he's playing a lot. DeAndre Hopkins is still not back. We had a couple weeks till that. So you got Hollywood Brown, you have Zach Ertz, and you have Rondale Moore as their third guy in here. At 4,100, he's a guy that could break any play anytime. They may hit an end around to him. He's really, really talented, really athletic. It's a risky play. Like he could go 3 for 12. Don't get me wrong. He's had a lot of those games. I do like they threw a little bit deeper to him in this week than they did last year. Last year's his yards per, or his air yards were really low. They threw a lot of receiver screens to him or balls behind the line of scrimmage, but they threw the ball a little bit more downfield than him last week. 4,100. I just have a Rondale Moore feel this week. I think he makes a big play.
Yep, Rondale Moore would be my favorite as well. If I had to name a pivot off that, it would probably be Zay Jones, who people will forget about a little bit because he sat out last week. But for 4,100 in a really good matchup at home against the Texans, I mean, in his last game, he had 10 catches, I think. So Zay Jones would be fine. But I'm with you. I like Moore.
Yeah, I didn't love. I usually like a lot of guys this range. I did not like a lot this week, so I'm gonna obviously figure that out as we go along. You can kind of build. Every slate's different, but those two were the guys that I had bold under 4,500. I'm glad to see you're at least on the same page there.
Mm-hmm. I guess one other guy you could Jarvis Landry, I guess, could be okay if Michael Thomas is out, but again, probably I'm not going to do that with Andy Dalton.
I'm leaving you on your own on Landry Island.
Okay, good. No, I'm not going to play him.
I've had too many of those I like Landry's floor this week and he does nothing. So I'm not going there myself. Let's talk tight ends. We talked about how crazy the pricing structure is. We got George Kittle over 5,000. George Kittle's done nothing in fantasy. He's obviously great for the Niners. He blocks really well and all that. And especially with Trent Williams out, he's really, really important to them. But fantasy-wise, it's been a long time since George Kittle, did much for us. So he's 5,200. I don't think a lot of people are going to play him, but we've got a lot of guys in the 4,000. We mentioned some of them. We have Hawkinson off the monster game at 4,900. Zach Ertz is 4,800. Goddard's 4,700. Kyle Pitts was 44, but probably not going to play. And you got Tyler Higbee down here at 4,300. Really, really involved right now. He has over 60 yards 3 weeks in a row. He appears to be their number 2 target. They're throwing to him more than Allen Robinson. He has, I think he's 10 for 73 and 14 targets last week. That's crazy. And we've got a game against Dallas that maybe we get a little back and forth here. Both defenses are probably better than the offenses, but we got some talented players here. What are you doing in the 4,000? I feel like there's 4 or 5 really good choices here, and trying to figure out which one to play is pretty tough.
Yeah, 4 or 5 really good choices, and Tyler Higbee projects the best.
Interesting. All right.
So for cash games, yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, 10 catches on 14 targets last week, and part of it's the price. He's cheaper than Goddard, Ertz, Hawkinson, so that's also why he projects a little better. But also the matchup, dealing with Micah Parsons in that pass rush should actually favor Higbee a little bit too. So for cash games, I think Higbee is the play. For tournaments, I'll probably just make it work with my stack. So I like Goddard, like we talked about, maybe even Ertz. I would have played Pitts opposite Tampa if Pitts played.
Kyle Pitts. It's just been the weird thing with Pitts last week is he wasn't on the field that much. He played 60% of the dropbacks. I get the no targets, but he wasn't even playing that way. The whole thing is weird. Yeah,
it was. I think it was the hamstring.
Yeah, it must have been.
That he missed practice with. So Pitts has been frustrating. So I think it's those guys, and then you can go a little lower. Pat Freiermuth's been okay, but again, I don't want to target the Steelers passing game. I don't mind David Njoku again.
Another good game last week.
Yeah, and he's a guy, sort of like you mentioned with Goddard, that can score longer touchdowns or more receiver-style touchdowns.
Yeah.
What about
you? I like Njoku too. 3,800, back-to-back good games. He was 5 for 73 on 7 targets last week after the big game where he was 9 for 89 and a touchdown. I think almost on all my lineups, I'm just going to go Goddard and Higbee. I just think it's they're cheap. It's just kind of easy. 4,700 for Goddard, 3 or 4 weeks over 60 yards. He was 5 for 72 last week. Not a ton of targets every week, but just makes plays. And like I said before, it's just an offense where you can't really focus on him. You've got A.J. Brown, you've got Devontae Smith, you got these running backs, you have Hurts might run the ball too. I just think there's always open space for Goddard, and 2 or 3 times a game they hit him, and it's a big 20-yard play. And I love that for my tight end. You just need that in the red zone. Like, give me a 30-yard play, for a touchdown. We're perfect there. And Higbee is just the second target in an offense with a good quarterback. I know Stafford hasn't been great so far, but I think we know he's a pretty good player. 4,300 there just kind of works too. One name I wanted to ask you about then here, and it's funny because I was scrolling through, I was like, holy crap, I can't believe this guy is this price. Dallas Schultz against the Rams. Dallas Schultz was like a 6th, 7th round pick in fantasy drafts like a month ago. He was like the 5th, 6th tight end taken, down to 3,400. He has not meshed with Cooper Rush. We mentioned how CeeDee Lamb has. Dalton Schultz was 2 for 18 in week 2, then missed a game. 0 catches for 0 yards last week with Cooper Rush. I think he had 3 targets. Obviously a talented guy, and at 3,400 is really, really cheap. Do you kind of go with a leap of faith on Schultz at all, or do you need to see it with Rush before you even think about playing him?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. That's fair. I just wanted to ask you.
No. It makes sense because I've seen him mentioned other places this week as well because of that price tag. It's so cheap.
Yeah.
But I think with, they're underdogs. Gallup's back now. They have 2 running backs. I don't know. I'm just not really trying to target Cooper Rush and his tight end in this spot. I get it, but I'm with you. Like, these 4K guys look pretty good on this slate. So I'm going to have Goddard, and I'm going to have Higbee, and maybe I'll have Njoku if I go below that, but I'm kind of going to stick with those guys that I trust in that range.
Yeah, it's a pretty narrow tight end grouping for me this week. The player pool, if you want to play Hawkinson or Ertz instead, I totally get that too. They're all the same range. We're all kind of the same guy. I just think Goddard and Higbee stick out for me, and I think Goddard's pretty much my favorite this week by a decent margin. Before we jump out of here, we've kind of hit everything on offense. What about defense? We've got a couple of really, really good defenses and good matchups at the top. We have Buffalo versus Pittsburgh. Kenny Pickett, first start at 4,100. Nice soft landing spot for Kenny Pickett. He gets a defense is just murdering quarterbacks. And then we have the Niners against Carolina. Baker Mayfield's already getting mad at the press for asking about tipped passes and all that kind of stuff. It seems like he's kind of over it. They're 3,800. They are. I mean, I can't argue against either one of those. Yeah, I think the Niners are going to give Mayfield just fits back there, and Buffalo against Pickett, like high chance for some mistakes there. So I think those are pretty obvious plays, but I want to get off those. If you're getting cheap this week, you need to save some money here. What are you doing kind of down? Let's go 32, 3,300 and below. What kind of defense are you down here you can find yourself playing?
Okay, well, I think for cash games, the Cowboys will be the play for cash games at 2,500.
Stole mine right out from under me.
I mean, as you mentioned, they have the current favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, Micah Parsons, and the Rams line is a bit banged up, and you have 2,500. I mean, the Cowboys' defensive line currently ranks number 1 in the NFL, and the Rams' offensive line is 23rd. So there's just a little bit of a mismatch there, and they're cheap. I know. I'm sure that's what you were going to say as well. Do you have anyone else in the cheap range that you like?
Why is Dallas 2,500?
I don't know.
Just because they're going against the Rams, but the Niners had 7 sacks against the Rams offensive line last week. I guess that was the Monday night game, so maybe I guess the pricing was already out. But man, the Cowboys haven't gotten points yet. Yeah,
I'm guessing that. DraftKings factors into the algorithm that they're however many underdog.
Yeah,
they're sizable underdogs. But you're right; they're too cheap.
I mean, Dallas hasn't given up 20 points all year. The Rams' offensive line is terrible right now. They look uncomfortable. The Niners just absolutely smoked them on defense last week. It's 7 sacks, and I just think they're way too cheap. I think Dallas is super talented on defense. But if I wanted to get different, I think I'd actually go up a little bit to 3,000. I go with the Tennessee Titans against Washington. I always like getting some Carson Wentz on my against my defense. I just think he's prone to mistakes. So I do like that a little bit. I also like Miami at 3,200. I get up a little bit higher, but against the Jets, I think Zach Wilson looked okay last week, but another guy that probably going to get a little bit of forcing in there. I like that. I've seen people talk about Seattle a lot. They're 2,500, the same price as Dallas, going against Jameis or Andy Dalton. I just don't love Seattle's defense. I get that the matchup could work out well here, but I don't love that play as much as most people do. If I'm going to go away from Dallas, which I'm probably just going to go Dallas if we're being honest, I'd probably go up a little bit to Tennessee or up a teeny bit more to Miami, but probably Tennessee is my second favorite.
Yeah, I agree with all those calls. Just to say, if people are thinking about paying all the way up, I think it could be worth it this week for the Bills or Niners.
It's funny. I was just going to ask you if this is a week, maybe you think that paying up, you go away from Dallas is going to be popular, and there's not a lot of other games like down there. I wonder if that's an interesting way to get different on some really good matchups.
Yeah, maybe. And those defenses have 20-point upside. I mean, you mentioned about the Niners, and then you got the Bills against that rookie QB. Bills have the second ranked defensive line right now, and the Steelers line is just as bad as ever, ranked 30th right now. So huge mismatch in that game. Those two defenses have 20 fantasy point upside. So yeah, you could play them in tournaments.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I might try and get up to some Buffalo this week. There's enough cheap values and stuff we talked about. I think that in a week, I usually like to play an expensive defense I love in a week where there's a cheap one that everybody loves. So it's like there's gonna be a ton of rostership on Dallas. So if you get a week where you can be different, I usually don't like to pay up for defense, but a week where everybody likes the cheap one, I think is the week to do it. And I mean, Buffalo just projects so well here. You got to think Pickett may get sacked, make some mistakes, fumbles, throws into coverage. You can see this being an absolute mess for them on offense. And though they should be behind, so you got to figure they're going to throw the ball. I don't think they're just going to sit on it. They may sit on it early and run a lot of Najee in the first half, but you got to think second half, as long as they're within some sort of striking distance, they're going to throw the ball a ton.
Yep, agreed.
Love it. Anybody else you want to talk about? Anything else on your mind before we jump out of here for week 5? I can't bet it's week 5 already.
Yeah, no, I think we covered it.
Beautiful. Want to thank everybody for listening to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored this week by No House Advantage. We really appreciate everybody listening, anybody watching live, all that kind of stuff, anybody listening to the audio version. We really appreciate that too. If you want to follow us on Twitter, I am at Scott Jenstad. Ryan is at Ryan, then Belongia is Belongia. So if you want to follow him on there, we got a little football talk. He might have some soccer talk. I might have some Draymond talk, but we'll try and keep it to football on the weekend. Usually we try to do that. So thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate it. Hope everybody has a really good week 5. We'll be back at you with week 6 next week. Take care.
Thanks. Good luck, everybody.